Hello, everybody. It's Michael Pierce here. I'm wearing my headphones because I discovered that the reason that the audio, I think, usually sounds better in my interviews is because I'm wearing my headphones during most of my interviews. So I'm trying that this time, and I've done a few tests, and I think it sounds better than when I just use the phone's audio. I don't know why it took me that long to figure that out, but hopefully it will resolve a few of the audio issues that have bugged me. Blah, 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 blah. I'm in a new place. I'm not going to tell you where because I'm paranoid, even though it's probably not too difficult to figure it out if you really wanted to figure that out. I don't know. But I am at my apartment preparing for graduate school. So the semester hasn't started yet, but it will in a little bit, and I will be ready, and it'll be good. And I'll probably give you like sort of vague updates about that and stuff for those who are interested. But yeah, so I'm in a new place. I have my that's not a real Van Gogh, but obviously, but it's a reproduction my dear older sister gave me of an olive grove, which I really like. And there's my signature picture of Jesus over there. But and my books, and yeah. So anyway, what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to ramble for a bit. And I am thinking, and we'll see how things go when the semester actually starts, but I'm thinking I wouldn't mind actually trying to do just a video like this every week, because I haven't been producing a whole lot of content for a while. I've been very sporadic, partly because I was working on the book, and just a lot of other things. I've kind of been trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but now that I'm in a new environment, new situation, things seem, at least at the moment, to be kind of convenient for me to try doing some more videos. But I'm thinking more videos like this, almost kind of like a podcast where I'm just talking and y'all can listen in to what I'm saying and what I'm thinking. So it will be either about typology or it'll be about philosophy or whatever I feel like talking about. But I'm thinking I'll try to do this once a week. We'll see how that goes. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. But I hope you all have been doing well. I'm doing rather well, particularly today. And what I wanted to talk about is a typology notion. In some sense, this is in preparation. Oh, point of order. I know it's 2 minutes, 45 seconds into the video, but better late than never. A little advertisement. I'll be doing my final interview. I mean, I'm sure we'll do more interviews in the future at some point, but my final of the temperament interviews with the channel Ghost of Jung. I'll be doing that soon, and then he'll be posting it probably near the end of this week, but that's just me throwing that out there. It's whenever he's able to finish it. But look for that video and check out. I'll put in the description the other interviews I've done with him, because they've been fun and they've been interesting, and I'd be curious what you guys think of them. I'll also probably in the next month or so be doing another interview with Jack Aaron from World Socionic Society, which is mainly what I wanted to talk about today. Oh, yeah, sorry. We'll just go forward with the video. I don't want to throw too many things on everybody's plate before I start off. This is related to what me and Jack Aaron have been talking about, which is, how do I put this? I'll put a link to this also. Our last interview that we did together, Jack was really zeroing in on the notion of trying to come up with more dichotomies in an attempt to better situate the functions and the cognitive functions into relation with each other. A better way of putting it is this. In the model that I have used heretofore, have kind of developed up to this point, there has been kind of a linear element to it rather than a circular element. So what I mean by that is you start with sensation. So you already kind of have this, the only word I have is privileging, even though that has a lot of connotations today, but sensation ends up getting privileged as the start. And then it proceeds from sensation to intuition to feeling to thinking, and then it ends there. And then you can go back the other way, but it's not a full circle, and it also doesn't have a fully symmetric relationship, because sensation and feeling in the model that I've created are utterly opposite to each other, and intuition and thinking are utterly opposite to each other. And this is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, there's sort of just, it's not symmetrical, and I know that bothers some people more than others. But I think more importantly, it just doesn't seem to be the implication that sensation and feeling are very opposite of each other, on like opposite ends of a spectrum, doesn't seem to be quite, there seems to be a relationship, an extra relationship that is missing there. And in fact, if you draw it out geometrically, I can't really show you images of this, but if you draw it out geometrically and you put, say, you do the typical function cross, where you have sensation and then intuition, they form a pole, and then you have thinking and feeling, and they form a pole. And so, okay, cool, you have perception and judgment, those are connections, but then you also have intuition linking with feeling in my original thing, and I refer to that as the connotative axis, so you could kind of draw a line like that. And then you have sensation and thinking, which are denotative, and you can draw a line like that. And so then you kind of have this two triangles. And Jack Aaron is like, well, but what about the line that goes from sensation to feeling? Isn't there a relationship there? And the same with intuition and thinking. And I've always suspected there was something, but I didn't want to overcomplicate my model when I was writing the book, and I also didn't find it necessary at that point to bring that up, also because of certain symmetries in, I also think I just liked the narrative aspect of the progression. I still find that compelling. I haven't completely let go of that, but for the sake of this video, I want to explore, so we're starting here. We're starting with completing the, if you can imagine it, it's like a kite. Right? You have a cross, and then you have a box or a diamond around the cross, and that's sort of what you can also do. I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if this will be embarrassing or not. You see that? It's probably backwards, but it's the triangle. Anyway, that's sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling, and it forms, I don't know what the official name for it is, but if you've ever played D&D, you know they have that triangle dice. It's a four-sided die. I'm pretty sure, actually, unless I'm missing something, that is, I believe, the simplest three-dimensional figure that you can create. And by simplest, I mean it has the least number of sides. It only has 4 sides, and it's a triangular pyramid. It's not a true pyramid, because a true pyramid has 5 sides, because it has a square base, and then they all go up to a point. But this only has a triangular base, and then they go up to a point. And so you can model the 4 functions and their equal symmetrical relationship to each other by creating this little triangular prism, which I just thought was a cool, handy little way to think about it. Where was I going with that? Oh yes, so the point of that is if you look at the picture, you'll notice that each one of the functions, as a result, has 3 lines that I need to pause the video. Hello again. Yeah, that was a very abrupt change. Sorry about that. I'm not going to change it though, because that was 8 minutes of audio, and I don't want to have to try to re-record all that again, because as much as I might try to make it more concise, conciseness when I am speaking does not seem to be something I am capable of. I don't know what it is. It's just the way my brain works. It's much easier to be concise when I'm writing, because all of the hedging and stuff, I don't know. Anyway, that's something for a video for another time. Sorry, 40 seconds. Getting back into what I was saying, I re-listened to it, and we're going to go here. There's 3 lines. So you take, say, sensation, 3 lines of relation to the other ones. Great. So each of those lines represents a different dichotomy. And in the book, Motes and Beams, I use 2 dichotomies to differentiate the 4 functions of sensation, intuition, feeling, and thinking. Those 2 dichotomies are the denotative-connotative dichotomy, which I don't want to say invented, but for intents and purposes, yeah, I invented it for that book. Which denotative would be sensation, and thinking, and refers to kind of this directness to reality, this sense of just what is given, what reality is actually given, because there's sort of this realist side to sensation and thinking. Whereas with intuition and feeling, they are connotative, because it is the ideas that are not inherent in the thing, but are in some sense brought to the thing by the interpreter, or it could be interpreted into that thing. So it has a more creative side to it in the sense of forming connections that do not necessarily exist in the point itself. So you could almost imagine like a dot or a point, and that's the denotative or the denotation, and then the connotations are like shapes or lines that are drawn off of it that almost like relate it or connect it to other dots. Anyway, and then the other dichotomy is perception judgment, which I assume we all know what we're talking about there. Sensation, intuition are perception, what you see, experience without making any judgment, whereas thinking and feeling are the judgment functions. They're the ones that make decisions and form categories that separate the stuff which is perceived. Great. Jack Aaron was like, well, but there is a third dichotomy, or there should be a third dichotomy, which exists between sensation and feeling and intuition and thinking. And he was trying to hypothesize on what that dichotomy is. This video, unfortunately, is not going to be able to get into some of the words and terms which he has used, because I don't have them written down, at least on my papers in front of me, and also because you can watch some of his videos, or mainly watch the interview, the most recent interview that I did with him, where we talk about that, and we actually create a spreadsheet. In fact, I'll probably put a little bit more in the description below about some of the words that he's used. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to bring up the terms that I've been coming up with as I've been brainstorming about this. So Jack, if you're watching this, we have things to talk about in our inevitable volume 4 of our interview. But this is the drawing board. I'm using you all to draw out my ideas. Anyway, so the words that I use to describe the dichotomy that would define the relationship between sensation and feeling versus intuition and thinking, and the attribute of that I have gotten sort of locked in on, is this notion that sensation and feeling have, this word has negative connotations I don't mean, but they have a reactive quality to them. In fact, I actually do now remember the words that Jack Aaron used. I always refer to him as Jack Aaron. It rolls off the tongue, rather than just Jack. Anyway, the dichotomies he used were involved and detached, which I actually like. And by using the term reactive, I'm sort of playing off of that notion of involvement, where sensation and feeling in Jack's estimation have this involvement with the object. There's kind of this, I don't want to say primitive, but there's a more, that's the only word that comes to mind, a more primitive relationship with the object, where you are kind of being drawn into it, where you are letting the object dictate this information to you. That's certainly how it is with sensation, because the funny thing is about the words that are used is sensation and feeling in sort of the, vernacular of everyday language, the casual use of those terms. It's sensation and feeling. They're almost synonymous in English anyway, where, oh, I'm sensing something, oh, I'm feeling something. And so it's kind of, this dichotomy can easily just sort of take that coincidental connection between the two in the English language and just say, well, that's what it is. There's this, that's kind of what I'm doing, where I think there is a reactivity to those functions. There is, whereas with intuition and thinking, there's a detachment, as Jack Aaron says. They are standing back from the object. And so, by the way, you can already see that this works nicely in lining them up, because in the book, I make a big point out of trying to line up all of the dichotomies with the original dichotomy of extroversion and introversion, of saying that which ultimately you can line up with this notion of yin and yang and the masculine, feminine, and connect it with mythology and all that cool stuff. But here you could see the detachment would have this more introverted sense to it, because it's standing back from the object and kind of trying to look in at it. There's whereas with sensation and feeling, there's this involvement where they're sort of like with extroversion, they are being swallowed up into the object. And so, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that for now, as I'm kind of brainstorming about that. Right now, it's kind of just in the form of images in my head of intuition, thinking, and sensing, feeling. I do like that involvement, but I add in the reactiveness to it, because one of the things I notice is that if you use my sort of chronological narrative of the functions, where you progress from sensation to intuition to feeling to thinking, one of the things you notice is that sensation and feeling, sensation is the first function of the perceiving functions, and feeling is the first function of the judging functions. And so if you want to follow that chronological allegorical narrative, then you can, that's another way of saying, oh, I've used the term in my notes when kind of writing this down, sort of primitive or original or inaugural, like they're the beginning portion. And so it's almost like there's this more chaotic element to it. There's this more, I think that's what it is. It's this original involvement with the object that you then draw back from. Now, ultimately, we would probably want to take the narrative element out of it, or at least question that, because it ruins the symmetry, and I don't think that's actually how the functions work. They're a circle. So I think you can also start from a point of view of detachment. You can start from intuition or thinking, and then become involved in the object. I should say some people might be confused, because intuition, particularly because of the way that the word is casually used. Thinking, I think a lot of people will be like, oh, sure, that makes sense with detachment. Intuition, I think a lot of people might feel like, but that is getting involved in the object. And I would say, no, intuition, if you want to describe it as getting involved, it does get involved in the sense that it's connotative, in that it's bringing stuff to the object, but what it's getting involved in is not the object itself, but almost like the thing in itself. They're getting involved in this projection of the true essence of the object, and then you can argue about whether or not that true essence really exists, whether there is a true essence to the object that you can somehow access via intuition, but it's not getting involved in the plain given object itself. It's getting involved in this creative projected image of the object into this essence of the object, which is not real in the same way that we speak of the object being given or real. So those are those dichotomies. I'm not done, though, as you can tell if you check how long the video is. And we'll see, because I don't want this video to go over 30 minutes, because that's when it cuts in half, and I don't want these to go on for forever. But the other set of dichotomies is, okay, so you have those original ones, and then you add an extroversion, introversion, right? And that's when you get the 8 cognitive functions, because now you have extroverted sensation, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, etc. So that covers 4 dichotomies. But at that point, you have, if you want to show the relationship of each function with every other function and have a characteristic line of relationship that describes them all, in sort of the same way that socionics has the intertype relations, and you only have like 14 relations there because of the way that the math works out for you to obviously you have more connections between each of the individual types. You have ESFP related to the INTP, related to the ENTP, related to this, and you do that for each type. But if you want the the prototypical or the typical relationship, which it doesn't care which specific type it is, it just wants to know what the relation is, then you only end up with like 14 kinds of relation. A lot of you are probably like, yeah, we know, Michael, get on with it. But this is what I do when I ramble. I have to run over these things. So anyway, the way you work it out is you end up with 3 more dichotomies that we have to account for in order to account for the 8 functions' relations to each other. So that you get a total of 7 dichotomies, because the 8th dichotomy would just be the self-relation. It would be SE related to itself. It's just a relation of identity. We don't care about that. So we have seven other relations. And so the other 3 that me and Jack were talking about, one of them I already identified in the book, and that's the contextual universal. And that is what differentiates SENI, TEFI versus the universalist functions, SINE, FETI. So that divides those ones up nicely. But at this point, this is with the last 2 is where Jack Aaron got me thinking. I should just call him Jack. Maybe I should call him Mr. Aaron. Maybe that would. Anyway, we were kind of discussing a little bit. Mainly, he was just trying to get me on the same page as him. But I've been thinking about what these last 2 dichotomies are, and he identified that what they would be is one of them would be the dichotomy that would, because you already have the contextual universal, and that distinguishes the aristocratic from the democratic temperament in the temperament model that I created, right? And then you have the theocratic and the anarchic, which are hybrid. I actually call them that in the book. You have the pure types, the aristocratic, which is wholly contextual, versus the democratic, which is wholly universal. And then you have the theocratic and the anarchic, which are partly contextual and partly universal. And Jack was like, but this is not symmetrical. And so what is it? Could you get a dichotomy which then does the same thing, but where the theocratic and the anarchic types are now the pure types along this dichotomy, and the aristocratic and the democratic are now the mixed types? And I cannot... Oh, I do remember, actually. I know I said earlier I wasn't going to remember, but I do. The dichotomy that Jack proposed was confirming versus questioning, with the theocratic being confirming and the anarchic being questioning. I can't go in... We talked a little bit about that in the interview, so I'll just leave that there. I've kind of departed a bit from that, at least for now. I don't disagree with that, but the dichotomy I wanted to describe here or propose was what the theocratic temperament has as sort of a pure example, a pure type of, I would describe as this performative or presentative element that I think all of those functions, SE, NI, FE, and TI, I think those 4 functions share a presentative or persona-focused attribute. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. Whereas the anarchic functions, NE, SI, TE, FI, are not persona-focused, but they have this integrity-focused notion. And I feel like we talked a little bit about that in a different context in our interview. But so what I mean by that, my intuition here, and it actually came when I was thinking to myself about SE. And in part, I was thinking about it because of some conversations I was having with an ESFP friend of mine, talking about SE and realizing there's an element to SE that actually relates it to FE. And I've never really talked about this before, and I don't know if a lot of people have, but it's very evident and it's very important to understanding SE. FE has, from the beginning of Carl Jung describing it, been understood as having this persona focus, where they're aware of what other people are feeling, and sort of like the face of people and the face that they themselves are projecting forward. They are aware of that sort of thing. At least that's the That's the way I think about it, because it's the objective values that are out there. The thing is, I think SE is also that way. I think SE has what I've been referring to as a persona focus. There is a sense with SE, and by implication with NI being attached to it, of having this sense of the difference between appearance and the inner reality. That might be what it is. The intuitive notion that the reality is something that is interior, whereas the external part is the persona. I need to think more about this because I think you could probably build it up geometrically just from the definitions of, well, what do sensation and feeling have in common? Well, they are involved functions, but I actually hadn't been thinking about it that way. I was just thinking in terms of what you would get is the theocratic temperament would be the purely persona-focused type. And that's something I think I've seen in myself and in others, where theocratic types are very aware of this gap between their interior, their id, the sort of interior part of themselves, and how they present themselves. And it's almost an irreducible gap, because the external actions that you take must always be separate from, they're connected to, but there's always this kind of difference where you feel like, well, but then people will take what you say and then now it's theirs, and they take it away from you and they can interpret it in different ways. And so there's kind of this hope to try to control that, which is usually related to FE, but I think SE is also a part of it. Because SE, I do talk in the book about the fact that SE has this element of showmanship to it that I think is very important for understanding it. It has this understanding intuitively, no pun intended, of what other people are thinking of it or how they're coming off to other people. That when you combine it with FE, it makes it very, very present. And that's why you get a lot of this kind of intentional or unintentional showmanship, or sort of image focus, and also potential two-facedness with the beta quadra, with the theocratic temperament, because there's that performative element. Whereas, and you'll get obviously half of that performative element with the Democrats, the democratic temperament. Say with the ENTP, with their FE, they have a sense of that performative element, and you also get it with the aristocrats, because Nietzsche could be very showy, but I still think he was an aristocrat. But it's that SE, there's a showiness to SE that's trying to make an effect. It might be because it's extroverted involved, it's trying to get other people involved in the thing, and also has a tendency to be involved in this external realm. Whereas the anarchic temperament, what distinguishes it is what I referred to in my jotted notes here as integrity focused, or almost, I use the word revealing. So what would be going on there, presumably, I'm actually sort of spitballing this as I talk, is it's, you have the interior is what is involved. So they sort of become, as it were, internally involved, self-involved with the object that is themselves. And then what is exterior, what is extroverted, is the detached element, is the intuition and the thinking, because their functions are NESITEFI. So for them, they don't have this persona focus, they have this self or integrity focus, where they are focused on trying to be, the classic trope, being true to yourself, but being true to what that really means is being involved in your own principles, being reactive to your own principles, having this sort of original, more primitive relationship with those, this primordial relationship with those. Whereas externally, I don't know how that would translate quite to the external realm, but because right now I think I'm only thinking in terms of the involved portion of it. Because with the theocrats, I think it would be that they're very involved in the external realm, but internally there's this detachment. And I think that's actually exactly what it is. Because when you talk with, a lot of people have commented on when they talk with INFJs, there can often feel as though there is this, at times unsettling, as I've met, and I've tried to overcome it in myself, but there is a detachment in their inner realm as they sort of look at themselves and they look at other people. And that can almost be sort of cold and calculating as far as other people are concerned. Whereas externally, they're very warm and everything. Whereas with the anarchists, it would be flipped, right? Where in their relations externally, there would be more of a temptation to be more detached in relation to other people, whereas they're very involved on the inside. So yeah, that's very interesting. And then, so that's that dichotomy. Those are sort of my thoughts on that for the moment. And I plan to develop them more in the future, and I'm sharing them with you so that you can develop them some more. Because I don't know how busy I'll be with my degree, but the final dichotomy is that Jack Aaron had proposed is the one, it's responsible for the relationship, or it refers to the relationship of the extroverted perceiving functions with the introverted judgment functions, those forming one group, and that is versus the other way that you can have it, pardon me, which is the introverted judgment versus extroverted perceiving. I just said that, sorry. The extroverted judgment, introverted perceiving. So you see how this kind of cuts through the temperaments that I just set up, because you have, you'll have some types where their dominant functions are extroverted perceiving plus an introverted judgment function, versus a type whose dominant functions will be the other way around, extroverted judgment and introverted perceiving. And I know Jack had tentatively proposed some terms, and I cannot remember what they were. And I'm not going to sit here making you listen to me try to figure it out, but I can't remember. But the words that I wrote down as I was trying to figure this out is I would propose that. So actually, just let's take a step back for a moment. To continue the extroversion, introversion, everything fitting under these two columns, of the theocratic, or rather, as I'm saying, the performative versus the integrity focused. The performative I would put under the extroversion side. That's where I'm inclined to put it, whereas the integrity would be under the introverted side. And so that's where I would currently place those. So if we fast forward here, I would place the extroverted perception plus introverted judgment. Where do I place that? Just a moment. I'm trying to find where I wrote. There's where I put it. The word that I came up for that is surveying, which sounds a little bit too much like perception, but there's nuance to it. I say surveying because the image in my mind is, okay, you have the introverted judgment, and it's like a little dot, and it's anchored into the ground, and then you have the extroverted perception, which is perceiving from that anchored point outwards, and it's looking out from that point, and it's like a tether ball, it can kind of revolve around like the electron around the anchored nucleus. On the other hand, you have the extroverted judgment and introverted perceiving, which what you have then is you reverse the stability of the images. You have an external shell, which is very hard, and then you have internal perception. You almost have this internal wisdom or internal cranking of the gears going on. And then you just have this external shell which just kind of roves around and like a combine, just harvesting everything. So those are kind of the images. So that's why I said that the one is surveying and the other is leading, or it has this I guess you could say it's not necessarily that it takes charge. Obviously, you have the TE and the FE involved there, but it's that notion that they have this wisdom inside of themselves, represented by NISI, and then it is put into practice via the extroverted judgment functions. Whereas in the other side, they're not trying to change anything. That's where you get the I'm anchored here and I'm just observing the world around me. So surveying versus leading are sort of the current words I use for those dichotomies. So, and I would put surveying under the extroverted side and the leading under the introverted side, because, you know, I'm going with the yin yang thing. I should mention though that I wrote down here that if I'm really to be fully consistent with my kind of yin yang thing, the way that I've kind of been developing it here, I would have to make, and I'm loath to do this, and I'm not sure if I do want to do it, but I'll mention it here. The implication would be that I would probably need to switch the contextual and the universal. In the book, I made the universal the more feminine axis. I interpreted it in that way, mythologically, and I hold to that. But here it would certainly sound as though it ought to be more on the other side, where the universal axis is that which steps back and is looking at what's on the ground from this detached standpoint, whereas the contextual is what is involved. Even though in the book I tended to characterize them more as the universalist is that which is receiving and is simply listening to what's going on and pooling all of these perspectives, but whereas the contextual is like acting on the environment, but I don't think that's really what it is. The contextual axes, I think, and it goes back to the reason I called them that. They're contextual because they are responsive to the environment and how it is changing moment to moment, whereas the universalist is much more introverted and is, they've already accumulated all of this information and knowledge, and now they are concretizing principles and they are acting upon the environment or proposing or interpreting the environment from this detached standpoint, where they have detached themselves from the whole. They are no longer regarding the individual context, and they're sort of acting from an Archimedean standpoint, dictating like the voice of God down to the objects below. So that's interesting. But I'm not quite ready to give up my original characterization of contextual universal, because I think there's still, the way I put it in the book forms a whole. And so even if some things turn out to be outdated, the way in which I meant them there has a validity to it. But anyway, these are just my thoughts as I'm kind of thinking about this. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. And yeah, I will see you in the next video.